My name is Sarah, and I'm 32 years old, living in Denver, Colorado. What I'm about to share with you is something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, even though it happened just a few months ago. You know that feeling when you realize the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally have been seeing you as nothing more than a bank account? That moment when the veil drops and you see your family for who they really are? Well, let me take you through my story, and maybe you'll understand why I had to make the hardest decision of my life. I work as a marketing executive for a wellness company, and after years of climbing the corporate ladder, I finally reached a position where I could breathe a little easier financially. I'm not wealthy by any means, but I make enough to live comfortably, save for retirement, and yes, treat myself to nice things occasionally. Growing up in a middle class family in Ohio, I learned the value of hard work early on. My parents, Linda and Robert, always emphasized education and ambition, pushing me to be the best version of myself, or at least, that's what I thought they were doing. Looking back now, I can see the signs were always there. When I got my first promotion at 26, my mother's reaction wasn't just pride. There was something else in her eyes, a calculating look that I dismissed at the time. She immediately started talking about how the family could finally take that trip to Hawaii they'd always dreamed of. Was so happy to be able to help, to give back to the people who had raised me. That first time, I offered to pay for their plane tickets as a gift. The joy on their faces made it all worth it, or so I thought. The thing about generosity is that it can become a trap when the people receiving it start to expect it. That Hawaii trip was just the beginning. The following year, when vacation planning came around, my father called me with that tone I'd come to recognize, half casual, half expectant. Sarah, honey, we're thinking about the Caribbean this year. Your mother found this beautiful resort in Jamaica. Of course, we'll need to figure out the logistics. The pause that followed was heavy with expectation. Without him even asking directly, I found myself offering to cover the accommodation costs. After all, they'd covered my flights the year before, hadn't they? Except when I really thought about it, they hadn't. They'd used the money I'd given them for their tickets to book mine too, presenting it as their gift to me. Year after year, the pattern continued and evolved. What started as me helping with flights became me booking entire vacation packages. My older brother Michael, who worked as a teacher in Phoenix, would always conveniently mention how tight money was right before these trips. My younger sister Emma, fresh out of college and working retail in Seattle, would text me privately about how she couldn't afford to go unless someone helped her out. And there I was, Sarah the successful one, Sarah the generous one, Sarah who couldn't say no to family. The vacation expenses were just the tip of the iceberg. There were the emergency car repairs for my parents that seemed to happen right before every major holiday. The medical bills that insurance supposedly didn't cover. Michael's daughter Lily needed braces, and wouldn't you know it, the orthodontist demanded payment up front. Emma's apartment had a pest problem, and the landlord was threatening eviction if she didn't pay for the extermination herself. Each request came wrapped in gratitude and promises that they'd pay me back when things got better. Things never got better, and the IOUs piled up like autumn leaves, beautiful in their lies and destined to crumble. I remember the exact moment when I started to feel the weight of it all. It was a Thursday evening in March, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, going over my bank statements. I'd been feeling anxious about money, which seemed ridiculous given my salary. As I traced through the transactions, a pattern emerged that made my stomach drop. In the past year alone, I'd spent more on my family than I had on my own rent. The number stared back at me from the screen, unforgiving in its truth. $47,000. That's what I'd given them in 12 months. Vacations, emergencies, loans that weren't really loans. My savings account, which should have been healthy and growing, was nearly depleted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every request, every guilt trip. The way my mother would sigh deeply before mentioning how tired Dad looked, how he really needed a break. The way Michael would joke about teacher salaries while showing me pictures of things Lily needed. The way Emma would call me crying about her struggles, always ending with, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Sarah." I thought I was being a good daughter, a good sister. But lying there in the dark, I wondered if I'd just been a fool. The next family vacation planning session started innocently enough. We were all on a video call, my parents from their living room in Columbus, Michael from Phoenix, Emma from her tiny Seattle apartment, and me in my Denver home office. My mother was practically glowing with excitement as she shared her screen, showing us pictures of an exclusive resort in Turks and Caicos. "Isn't it gorgeous?" she gushed. "I've already talked to the travel agent. For all of us, it would only be about $15,000 for the week." That includes the private villa and all meals. Only $15,000. The words hung in the digital space between us. I watched as my siblings suddenly became very interested in their phones, avoiding eye contact. My father cleared his throat. Of course, we'll need to figure out how to handle the expenses. Sarah, you've always been so good about helping with these things. There it was, not a request, just an expectation. An assumption that I would once again open my wallet and make their dreams come true. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the memory of that $47,000 figure, or maybe it was just the casual way they discussed spending my money. Actually, I heard myself saying, I won't be able to help with this trip. I've had some unexpected expenses come up. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's smile froze on her face. My father's expression darkened. Michael finally looked up from his phone, and Emma's eyes widened with something that looked like panic. What do you mean, unexpected expenses? My mother asked, her voice taking on an edge I recognized all too well. Is everything okay? Are you in some kind of trouble? The concern in her voice might have fooled someone else, but I knew better. She wasn't worried about me, she was worried about her vacation. I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just need to be more careful with my spending. I'm sure you all understand. The call ended awkwardly, with promises to figure something out and talk more later. But I knew this was just the beginning. Sure enough, the individual calls started within an hour. First Emma, tears in her voice, telling me how she'd been looking forward to this trip all year, how it was the only thing keeping her going through her difficult job. Then Michael, more aggressive, reminding me of all the times he'd helped me when we were kids, conveniently forgetting that I was the one who'd paid for his daughter's braces just 6 months ago. But it was my parents' call that really revealed the truth of our family dynamic. They didn't even pretend to be concerned about my financial situation. My father's voice was cold, businesslike. Sarah, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is unacceptable. We've already told people about this trip. Your aunt and uncle are expecting to see photos. How do you think it's going to look if we have to cancel because you're being selfish? Selfish? The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd given them nearly $50,000 in a year, and I was selfish for saying no once? My mother took the phone then, her voice switching to the manipulative sweetness she'd perfected over the years. Sweetheart, we know you work so hard. We're so proud of you. That's why we know you can afford this. It's just 1 week. Think of it as an investment in family memories. You don't want to be the reason we miss out on making these precious moments together, do you? I wish I could say I stood strong in that moment, but the truth is, I almost caved. The guilt was suffocating. Every family dinner, every birthday card, every childhood memory seemed to demand that I give in. But then I remembered something my therapist had said during one of our sessions months ago, something I dismissed at the time. Guilt is not an indicator of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's just a sign that you're breaking a pattern that others have become comfortable with. I'm sorry, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. Not sorry for saying no, but sorry that our relationship had come to this. But my answer is still no. You'll need to find another way to pay for the vacation. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unspoken truths and expectations. Finally, my father spoke, and his words would echo in my mind for weeks to come. You know, Sarah, for someone who makes so much money, you sure have become cheap. I guess we know what's really important to you now. The call ended with the harsh click of disconnection, but the real disconnection had been building for years. Over the next few days, the family group chat became a battlefield. Messages flew back and forth, some directed at me, others about me as if I wasn't there. The word selfish appeared so often it began to lose meaning. My Aunt Patricia, who I'd barely spoken to in years, suddenly had opinions about my responsibility to family. My cousin Derek, who still lived in his parents' basement at 35, posted memes about family loyalty. But it was the message from my Uncle Thomas that really opened my eyes. It was in the general family chat, casual and cruel. Don't worry about the trip, everyone. Sarah's always been the cash cow of the family. She'll come around. She always does. Just give her time to get over her little tantrum. Cash cow. There it was, in black and white. Not daughter, not sister, not even Sarah. Just a cash cow, an animal to be milked for money. I stared at that message for a long time. My parents were in that chat. They saw it. They said nothing. No defense of me, no calling out the disrespect. Their silence was acceptance. Their silence was agreement. I screenshot the message, not sure why at the time, but knowing instinctively that I needed to document this moment. This was the moment I truly understood where I stood in my family hierarchy. The pressure intensified over the following weeks. Every few days brought a new crisis that required my financial intervention. Emma's car supposedly broke down and she needed $3,000 for repairs or she'd lose her job. Michael's daughter Lily suddenly needed emergency dental work that insurance wouldn't cover. My mother developed a mysterious illness that required expensive, out of network specialists. Each request came with increasingly dramatic consequences if I didn't help immediately. I might have fallen for it if they hadn't made one crucial mistake. Emma posted pictures on Instagram from a wine tasting weekend in Napa Valley the same week her car was supposedly broken down. Michael's wife Ashley accidentally let slip during a family call that Lily's dental work was just a routine cleaning. And my mother? She was photographed at her book club looking perfectly healthy, laughing over martinis just hours after sending me a text about being too sick to leave bed. The lies were so blatant, so carelessly constructed, that they felt more insulting than the requests for money. Did they think so little of me that they couldn't even bother to keep their story straight? Or had they become so comfortable taking from me that they'd stop feeling the need to justify it? Either way, something fundamental had broken in our relationship. And I knew there was no going back. I decided to test my theory with a small experiment. I sent a message to the family group chat, something I rarely did. Hey everyone, I'm going through a tough time at work. My company is downsizing and I might be affected. Just wanted to let you all know in case I seem distant. Trying to focus on job security right now? It was a complete lie. My job was secure and I'd actually just received a performance bonus. But I wanted to see how my family would react to the possibility that their cash cow might dry up. The response was immediate and telling. Within minutes, my parents were calling not to offer support or comfort, but to panic about the vacation. But you already have the money saved, right? My mother asked, not even pretending to care about my fictional job concerns. The trip is already booked. You can't back out now, even if you lose your job. We're counting on you. Michael's response was even worse. He sent a private message suggesting that if I was going to lose my job anyway, I might as well max out my credit cards on the family vacation. Think of it as going out with a bang, he wrote, adding a laughing emoji that made my skin crawl. Emma, at least, had the decency to ask if I was okay before quickly pivoting to how this would affect her plans to move to a better apartment. Plans that apparently hinged on me co-signing her lease and paying her security deposit. That evening, I sat in my living room, surrounded by photo albums I'd pulled out of storage. There I was at 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, on my father's shoulders. There was Michael teaching me to ride a bike, patient and protective. Emma as a baby, sleeping in my teenage arms. Family barbecues, holiday dinners, birthday parties, all captured in fading photographs that seemed to belong to different people entirely. When had it changed? When had I stopped being Sarah and become just a source of money? Was it gradual, like erosion? Or was there a moment when they collectively decided that my worth was measured in dollars rather than love? The photos offered no answers, only evidence of a time when things seemed simpler, or perhaps when I was simply too young to see the truth. I made my decision that night. If they wanted to treat me like a bank, then I would close the account. But I wouldn't do it quietly. I wouldn't slink away in shame or guilt. I would make sure everyone understood exactly what had happened, exactly what they had done. Not out of revenge, but out of a desperate need for truth in a family that had built itself on lies and manipulation. The next morning, I called my parents. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but when my mother answered with her fake, cheerful voice, all my prepared words disappeared. Mom, we need to talk. Can you get Dad? I want you both to hear this. The wariness in her voice when she agreed told me she sensed something had shifted. Good. It was time they understood that their cash cow had finally grown horns. When both my parents were on the line, I took a deep breath and began. I want to be clear about something. I'm not going to pay for the vacation. I'm not going to pay for any more emergencies, real or fake. I'm not going to be the family bank anymore. This isn't about the money. It's about respect, and you've shown me that you have none for me. My father tried to interrupt, but I kept going. Uncle Thomas called me a cash cow in the family chat. You saw it. You said nothing. That told me everything I needed to know about how you see me. So I'm done. I love you, but I won't be used anymore. The explosion was immediate. My father's voice rose to a roar, calling me ungrateful, reminding me of everything they'd done for me, how they'd sacrificed to put me through college. My mother cried, great heaving sobs that might have moved me if I hadn't heard her use the same performance to manipulate others. They tagged in and out like wrestlers, alternating between rage and tears, threats and guilt. If you do this, my father finally said, his voice deadly quiet, you're out of the family. No inheritance, no holidays, no relationship with your siblings or your niece. Is that what you want? To throw away your entire family over money? The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. They were willing to throw away our relationship over my refusal to give them money, but somehow I was the one destroying the family. I guess we'll see who's really throwing away family, I said, and hung up. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The phone immediately started ringing again, but I didn't answer. Instead, I did something I should have done years ago. I started documenting everything. I pulled up bank statements, saved text messages, compiled emails. The evidence was overwhelming when laid out systematically. 5 years of steadily increasing financial demands, guilt trips that followed a predictable pattern, lies that could be easily disproven with a simple social media check. By the time I was done, I had a file that told the story of financial abuse disguised as family love. The smear campaign began almost immediately. My mother, the same woman who had sobbed on the phone about losing her daughter, posted a carefully crafted message on Facebook. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, talking about the pain of watching your child choose money over family, complete with old photos of us in happier times. The comments poured in, sympathy and support for my heartbroken parents, condemnation for their selfish daughter. But I was ready. I had learned from the best manipulators after all. Posted my own message, simple and direct, accompanied by screenshots of the family chat where I was called a cash cow. Bank statements showing the nearly $250,000 I'd given them over 5 years, and text messages documenting their lies about emergencies. I didn't add any emotional plea or defense. The evidence spoke for itself. The reaction was swift and divided. Some family members, the ones who had benefited from my generosity, doubled down on their attacks. But others, particularly those who had been on the receiving end of my parents' manipulation in other ways, reached out privately with support and their own stories. My cousin Marie called to tell me how my parents had borrowed money from her elderly mother, promising repayment that never came. My father's brother, Uncle James, admitted he'd watched the exploitation for years but hadn't known how to intervene. The most surprising support came from Michael's wife, Ashley. She called me late one evening, whispering so Michael wouldn't hear. I'm sorry, Sarah. I've watched this happen and I should have said something. Michael's changed since he started expecting your help. It's like he stopped trying because he knew you'd always bail him out. Maybe this will be good for everyone in the long run. Emma's reaction was different. She showed up at my apartment, unannounced, mascara streaking her face, begging me to reconsider. Sarah, please, I can't afford anything without your help. How am I supposed to survive? I looked at my baby sister, 25 years old, and already convinced she was helpless. This was what our parents had created, what I had enabled. Learned helplessness passed down like a toxic inheritance. Emma, I said gently, I survived. I figured it out. So can you. The difference is, I believe you're capable of taking care of yourself. Mom and Dad, Thanksgiving. It was the email I sent parent, my mother, Michael, my parent, the learn. There were I started therapy to work through the guilt and grief. I took a solo vacation to Greece, something I'd always dreamed of but could never afford while funding everyone else's dreams. I started dating again, no longer afraid to let someone see my life clearly. I rebuilt my savings, invested in my retirement, and even bought a small investment property. The most important thing I learned was the difference between helping and enabling. Real love sometimes means saying no. Real love means believing people are capable of taking care of themselves. Real love doesn't come with a price tag or conditions or guilt trips. It took me 32 years to learn that lesson, but I'm grateful I learned it at all. A year after the big blow-up, I received an unexpected message from Emma. It was long, thoughtful, and shockingly mature. She wrote about how angry she'd been, how lost she'd felt without my financial support, but she also wrote about what she'd discovered in that year of struggle. She'd gotten a better job, learned to budget, even started a small savings account. She wasn't where she wanted to be yet, but she was proud of where she was, maybe for the first time in her life. I'm still hurt, she wrote, but I'm starting to understand. You didn't cut me off to be cruel. You cut me off so I could grow up. I'm 26 years old, and this is the first time I've ever felt like an actual adult. Thank you for believing I could do this even when I didn't believe it myself. We met for coffee a month later. It was awkward at first. Years of dysfunction don't disappear overnight. But there was something different about our conversation. She didn't ask for money. She didn't drop hints about her struggles. She talked about her job with actual enthusiasm, her roommates with genuine affection, her plans for the future with real ownership. This was the sister I'd always hoped she could be. Michael reached out next, though his approach was different. He didn't apologize or acknowledge the exploitation. Instead, he sent a brief email about Lily making the honor roll and wanting me to know. He sent back a congratulations card with no money inside, just words of pride for my niece. It was a small step, but it was something. My parents remain unchanged. The last I heard from mutual relatives, they were still playing the victim, still convinced they'd done nothing wrong. They'd found new sources of financial support, cycling through sympathetic extended family members who hadn't yet learned to say no. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I'd broken the cycle for myself, and that had to be enough. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never said no. Would I have funded their vacations until my own retirement was compromised? Would I have enabled my siblings' dependence until they were middle-aged and still helpless? Would the resentment have poisoned me, slowly turning me bitter and angry while smiling through another family dinner I'd paid for? I'll never know, because I chose a different path. It cost me my family, or at least the version of family I'd grown up with. But it gave me something more valuable: self-respect, boundaries, and the knowledge that love shouldn't come with a price tag. The cash cow found her voice, and she said no. And in that no, she finally said yes to herself. Looking back now, I can see the red flags I ignored for so long. The way money conversations always seem to happen right after expressions of love. The pattern of emergencies that mysteriously resolved themselves when I couldn't help immediately. The subtle competition between family members for who could extract the most from me. The way they talked about my successes not with pride, but with calculation. I share this story not because I want sympathy or validation, though the support from others who've experienced similar situations has been invaluable. I share it because I know I'm not alone. I know there are other daughters and sons out there who've been designated the family bank, who've been made to feel guilty for their success, selfish for having boundaries, cruel for saying no. To those of you in that situation, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago. Your worth is not measured by what you can provide financially. Family love should not come with an invoice. Helping and enabling are not the same thing. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow people to stand on their own feet, even if they hate you for it at first. The guilt will be overwhelming. The loss will be real. You'll question yourself 1,000 times, wondering if you're making a mistake. But on the other side of that pain is freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from endless financial drain, from the exhausting performance of being everyone's solution. Freedom to discover who you are when you're not defined by what you can give. My bank account has recovered. My sense of self has strengthened. My boundaries are firm but fair. And while my family of origin may never understand or accept my decision, I've built a chosen family of friends who love me for who I am, not what I can provide. They celebrate my successes without calculating their cut. They support me through challenges without seeing them as opportunities to exploit. The cash cow metaphor my uncle used was meant to diminish me, to reduce me to a resource to be used. But cows are actually incredibly intelligent, social creatures with excellent memories and strong survival instincts. So maybe being called a cash cow isn't the insult he intended. Maybe it's a reminder that even the most docile-seeming creature will eventually refuse to be milked dry. This holiday season will mark 2 years since the big family explosion. I won't be at my parents' table, listening to passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty between courses I paid for. Won't be slipping checks to siblings who've forgotten to even send a thank you card for last year's gifts. I won't be calculating how much this gathering costs me while everyone else calculates how much more they can get. Instead, I'll be with my chosen family, the people who've shown me what unconditional love actually looks like. We'll share a meal where everyone contributes what they can, where gratitude is genuine, where love isn't transactional. It won't be the family gathering I grew up imagining, but it will be real, and that makes it better than anything money could buy. To my birth family, if you ever read this, I loved you enough to say no. I loved you enough to break the cycle. I loved you enough to believe you could be more than dependents waiting for their next handout. That love remains, even if you can't see it through your anger and disappointment. The door isn't closed forever, but it will only open for relationships based on mutual respect, not financial exploitation. And to everyone else struggling with similar family dynamics, You are not selfish for having boundaries. You are not cruel for protecting your financial future. You are not a bad person for refusing to enable dependency. You are worthy of love that doesn't come with a price tag, of relationships that aren't based on what you can provide. The guilt will fade. The right people will understand. And the freedom you'll find on the other side is worth every difficult conversation, every family gathering missed, every relationship that couldn't survive your boundaries. My name is Sarah, and I'm no longer the family cash cow. I am a daughter who loves from a distance, a sister who believes in her siblings' capabilities, a woman who learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no. And I am finally, truly, free. But let me tell you more about how I got here because the journey was longer and more complex than I've shared so far. There were moments I haven't mentioned, conversations that shaped me, realizations that came in the quiet hours when I was alone with my thoughts. Remember one particular evening, about 3 months after the initial confrontation? I was grocery shopping, something mundane and ordinary, when I ran into Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor from Ohio. She'd known our family since I was in elementary school, had watched us grow up, attended our graduation parties and family barbecues. Seeing her there in the cereal aisle of a Denver supermarket felt surreal, like two different parts of my life colliding. Sarah, oh my goodness, is that really you? Her voice was warm, familiar, carrying the comfort of childhood memories. We hugged and she held me at arm's length, studying my face with those kind eyes that had seen me through scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. How are you, dear? How's your family? The question hung between us, simple and impossible to answer. How could I explain that the family she remembered, the one that had seemed so close-knit and loving, had fractured over something as basic as money and respect? How could I tell her that the little girl she'd watched grow up had become nothing more than a bank account to the people who were supposed to love her most? It's complicated, I said finally, and something in my voice must have conveyed the weight of that understatement because her expression softened. She touched my arm gently, a maternal gesture that made my throat tight with unshed tears. Oh, honey, she said quietly. I wondered when this would happen. Your mother used to brag about how well you were doing, but it was always followed by what you were doing for them. I remember thinking it seemed like a lot of pressure for a young woman. Her words hit me like a revelation. Someone had seen it, had noticed the pattern even when I was too close to recognize it myself. We talked for nearly an hour, right there between the cornflakes and granola bars. She told me stories I'd never heard, observations she'd kept to herself out of politeness. How my parents had always talked about my achievements in terms of what it meant for them. How they dismissed Michael's career choice not because teaching wasn't noble, but because it wasn't lucrative. How they discouraged Emma from pursuing art because there was no money in it. Your parents love you, Mrs. Henderson said carefully, but sometimes love gets twisted up with other things. Expectations, disappointments, fear. That doesn't make it right, but maybe understanding it helps. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. It made me think about my childhood differently, examining memories through a new lens. I remembered being praised not for kindness or creativity or courage, but for things that suggested future financial success. Good grades weren't celebrated for the learning they represented, but for the scholarships they might bring. My interest in business wasn't encouraged for its own sake, but for the prosperity it promised. There was the time in high school when I'd considered joining the drama club. I loved theater, loved the idea of bringing stories to life on stage. When I mentioned it at dinner, my father's response was swift and dismissive. Theater is a nice hobby, but you need to focus on activities that will look good on college applications. Business club, debate team, things that will lead to a real career. I joined the business club, of course. I'd always done what was expected. Michael had fought harder for his dreams. He'd insisted on becoming a teacher despite our parents' obvious disappointment. But I watched how they treated him afterward, the subtle and not so subtle ways they punished him for choosing passion over profit. Comments about how teaching was noble but not practical. Jokes about his cute little salary that weren't really jokes. The way they always turned to me when the check came at restaurants, even when we were teenagers and I was working minimum wage at the mall. Emma never stood a chance. By the time she was making choices about her future, the family dynamics were so entrenched that she'd internalized the message completely. She didn't even try to pursue her art seriously, settling for retail work that crushed her spirit but kept her dependent on family support. I wondered now if that was by design, if keeping her financially unstable ensured she'd never challenge the family structure the way Michael had tried to. These thoughts consumed me as I tried to rebuild my life without them. I threw myself into therapy with a determination I'd previously reserved for work projects. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, was a soft spoken woman who had a gift for asking questions that unlocked doors I didn't even know existed. Tell me about the first time you gave your family money, she asked during one session. Not the vacation, but the very first time. I had to think about it, digging through layers of memories. Then it came to me. I was 22, fresh out of college, working my first real job. I'd gotten my first bonus, a modest $1,000 that felt like a fortune at the time. I'd been so excited, planning to use it for a security deposit on a better apartment, one without roommates and closer to work. But when I'd called home to share my good news, my mother's voice had taken on that particular tone I'd later come to recognize as calculated vulnerability. Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. You know, it's funny timing. Father just found out he needs a dental procedure, and our insurance won't cover it. We're trying to figure out how to pay for it. The memory was so clear now, how I'd offered without being asked, how they'd protested just enough to make it seem like they weren't expecting it, how grateful they'd been, how proud they said they were to have raised such a generous daughter, how I'd felt so adult, so capable, so loved. I gave them the entire bonus. And did your father get the dental procedure? Dr. Martinez asked gently. Stared at her, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. I couldn't remember him ever mentioning it again. No follow-up about how it went, no complaints about recovery, nothing. When I thought about it, really thought about it, he'd seemed fine at Thanksgiving just a few weeks later, eating everything without any sign of dental issues. I don't think he did, I whispered, and the rage that followed that realization was volcanic. That session marked a turning point in my healing. I stopped seeing my family's behavior as misguided love and started recognizing it as calculated manipulation. The anger was cleansing in its clarity, burning away the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my judgment for so long. But anger, Dr. Martinez reminded me, was just one stage of grief, and I was definitely grieving, not just for the money I'd lost or the years I'd spent being used, but for the family I'd thought I had. The parents who loved me for me, not my bank account. The siblings who saw me as a sister, not a solution. The belonging that came without a price tag. I started writing letters I'd never send, pouring out years of suppressed feelings onto paper. Letters to my mother about how her love always felt conditional, how every expression of affection seemed to come with an invoice attached. Letters to my father about how he'd taught me my worth was measured in dollars, how his pride in me rose and fell with my salary. Letters to Michael about how he'd gone from my protector to my exploiter, how money had poisoned the bond we'd shared as children. Letters to Emma about how I'd enabled her helplessness, how my guilty generosity had stolen her chance to discover her own strength. Writing helped, but what helped more was building a new life. I joined a hiking group, finding peace in the Colorado mountains that had drawn me to Denver in the first place. I started volunteering at a financial literacy nonprofit, teaching young adults the money management skills no one had taught me. I dated carefully, being upfront about my family situation and watching how potential partners reacted to boundaries. I met James at a book club discussion about economic inequality, which in retrospect seems almost too on the nose. He was a social worker, passionate about breaking cycles of poverty and dependency. When I eventually told him about my family, expecting judgment or pity, he simply nodded. My brother was the successful one in our family, he said. Lawyer, big firm, nice house. My parents treated him like a god and me like a disappointment because I chose a career that helped people instead of making money. But you know what? He had a heart attack at 45 from the stress of maintaining everyone's expectations. That's when I realized being the family disappointment was actually a gift. We became friends first, bonding over our complicated families and our desire to build something healthier. He understood why I sometimes cried at commercials featuring happy families, why I both dreaded and longed for holidays, why I checked my phone with a mixture of hope and fear every time it buzzed. 6 months into our friendship, he invited me to his family's Thanksgiving. Fair warning, he said, we're all a little weird. My mom might try to read your palm, my dad will definitely talk too much about his model train collection, and my sister brings her rescue dogs to dinner, but no one will ask you for money or make you feel guilty for existing. That Thanksgiving was a revelation. His family was chaotic and imperfect, full of strong opinions and questionable fashion choices. But the love was uncomplicated. They teased each other without cruelty, helped without keeping score, celebrated successes without calculating their cut. When James's sister mentioned she was struggling to afford vet bills for one of her rescues, family members offered what they could without drama or guilt trips. $10 here, 20 there, a offer to help with a fundraiser. No one person bearing the entire burden, no one made to feel guilty for their contribution or lack thereof. This is what healthy looks like, I whispered to James as we did dishes together, and he squeezed my hand understanding without need for explanation. Meanwhile, the situation with my birth family continued to evolve. The smear campaign had mostly died down, replaced by a cold silence that was almost worse than the anger. But information still filtered through the family grapevine. I learned that the vacation they'd planned to Turks and Caicos had indeed been canceled. Instead, they'd gone camping at a state park 2 hours from their home. The pictures that made it to social media looked forced, everyone smiling too hard, as if trying to prove they were having just as much fun as they would have at a luxury resort. Michael had taken on a second job tutoring wealthy kids in test prep. The irony of him teaching entitled teenagers while complaining about his own entitlement wasn't lost on me. Ashley sent me occasional updates, careful, neutral messages about Lily's progress in school, always ending with, "She misses her Aunt Sarah." Those messages were the hardest to read. Emma had surprised everyone, including herself. Without my safety net, she'd been forced to take her financial life seriously for the first time. She'd moved in with 3 roommates, taken on extra shifts, and according to a cousin who still talked to both of us, had started selling her art online. Small pieces, nothing that would make her rich, but enough to supplement her income and remind her of dreams she'd abandoned. My parents, however, seemed determined to learn nothing. They'd simply shifted their focus to other family members, cycling through relatives with sob stories and emergency requests. My Aunt Patricia, who'd been so critical of my selfishness, found herself on the receiving end of their financial neediness. The last I heard, she was complaining to anyone who would listen about their constant requests for help. Funny how the shoe fits differently when it's on your foot, I told my cousin Marie when she shared this news. We'd grown closer since the family split, bonding over our shared experiences with manipulation and guilt. She'd started setting her own boundaries after watching my situation unfold, refusing to lend money to family members who'd proven themselves unreliable. The holidays remained the hardest time. That first Christmas after the split, I'd spent December 25th entirely alone. James had invited me to join his family, but I'd needed to sit with the loss, to mourn properly without distraction. There was no anxious checking of my bank balance, no mental calculations of how much each family member would expect, no passive-aggressive comments about my success making everyone else feel bad, no guilt trips disguised as gratitude. Just me, my choices, and my freedom. The second Christmas was easier. I spent it with James's family, contributing a homemade pie and a genuine smile. When his mother hugged me goodbye and thanked me for joining them, there were no hidden expectations in her words. She was just grateful I'd shared the day with them. Such simple, uncomplicated appreciation that it made me realize how twisted my normal meter had become. As winter turned to spring, I received another unexpected message. This time, it was from Michael. Unlike Emma's thoughtful letter, his was brief and businesslike. Lily was having a birthday party. She'd specifically asked if I would come. He wasn't asking for gifts or money, just my presence. The party would be at a public park, a potluck where everyone brought something to share. I stared at that message for hours, feeling pulled in different directions. Dr. Martinez and I spent 2 full sessions discussing it. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation or another manipulation? Could I trust myself to attend without falling back into old patterns? What did I owe to my niece, who was innocent in all this family drama? In the end, I decided to go, but I set clear boundaries for myself. I would bring a homemade gift, something personal that showed thought but not expense. I would stay for 2 hours maximum. If anyone asked for money or tried to guilt trip me, I would leave immediately. I practiced phrases with Dr. Martinez, ways to deflect financial requests or redirect manipulative conversations. The day of the party arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood. I sat in my car outside the park for 10 minutes, gathering courage. The gift I'd made, a scrapbook filled with photos and memories from Lily's earlier years, sat wrapped in bright paper on the passenger seat. No gift card tucked inside, no cash slipped between pages. Just memories and love, nothing more or less. I saw them before they saw me. My family, gathered under a park shelter, looking smaller somehow than they had in my memories. My parents seemed older, my father's hair more gray than I remembered, my mother's movements a bit slower. Michael was pushing Lily on a swing, his teacher's patience evident in the steady rhythm. Emma stood apart slightly, sketching something in a small notebook. It was Lily who spotted me first. "Aunt Sarah!" she called, jumping off the swing and running toward me. The pure joy in her voice, free from any adult complications, made my eyes water. Caught her in a hug, this child who'd done nothing wrong except be born into a complicated family. "I missed you," she whispered into my ear, and I held her tighter. The adults' reactions were more subdued. My parents offered stiff greetings, clearly unsure how to act. Emma gave me a small smile and a wave. Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. But no one mentioned money. No one brought up the past. For 2 hours, we all pretended to be a normal family celebrating a child's birthday. I left exactly when I'd planned to, despite Lily's pleas to stay longer. As I walked to my car, Emma followed me. "Sarah, wait," she called. I tensed, preparing for a request, but instead, she handed me a small canvas. It was a painting of mountains, rough but full of emotion. "I wanted you to have this. I painted it after everything. It reminded me of you. Strong and distant, but still beautiful." We hugged briefly, awkwardly, but it was something. A tiny bridge across the chasm between us. I drove home with the painting on the seat beside me, crying for what we'd lost, but grateful for what might still be possible. That night, I called James and told him everything. He listened without judgment, asking gentle questions that helped me process the complex emotions. "You did the brave thing," he said finally. "You showed up on your term. That takes incredible strength." The party marked a shift in our family dynamic. We weren't reconciled, not by any stretch, but we'd found a tentative peace. Occasional texts about Lily, holiday cards with no money enclosed, small interactions that acknowledged we were still family, even if we'd never again be close. My parents never apologized. I don't think they're capable of seeing what they did as wrong. In their minds, they were just doing what families do, what their parents had done to them. The cycle of financial enmeshment dressed up as love, passed down through generations like a poisoned heirloom, but I'd broken that cycle, at least for myself. The financial impact of those years of giving is something I'm still working to recover from. My retirement savings are years behind where they should be. The investment property I bought was smaller than what I could have afforded if I hadn't given away so much money, but I try not to dwell on what ifs. That money bought me hard-earned wisdom about boundaries, self-worth, and the true meaning of family. I still work with the financial literacy nonprofit, sharing my story with young adults who remind me of myself at that age. Eager to please, generous to a fault, unable to separate love from money. I tell them what I wish someone had told me, that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. That you can't buy love or guilt your way out of giving it. That family is about more than blood, and love is about more than money. James and I moved in together last year, carefully navigating the financial aspects of combining our lives. We have separate accounts and a joint one for shared expenses. We talk openly about money, about expectations, about boundaries. It's the healthiest relationship I've ever had, built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Sometimes I still dream about my family. Not nightmares, just quiet dreams where we're all together and money never comes up. Where my success is celebrated for its own sake, not for what it can provide others. Where love flows freely without price tags attached. I wake from these dreams with a bittersweet ache, mourning a family that never really existed outside my imagination. But I'm building something real now. A chosen family of friends who've proven their love through presence, not presents. A partner who values my heart over my bank account. A future that I'm funding for myself, not sacrificing for others' expectations. It's smaller than the grand family gatherings of my childhood, quieter than the chaos I grew up in. But it's mine, and it's real, and no one can guilt trip it away from me. The title Cash Cow still stings when I remember it, but I've reclaimed it in my own way. Yes, I generate wealth, but now I decide where it goes. Yes, I'm generous, but on my own terms. Yes, I provide, but only when it's healthy and sustainable. The cash cow grew horns and boundaries, and she's never been happier. To those still trapped in the cycle, still funding family members who see them as ATMs rather than people, I want you to know that there is another way. It's painful and difficult, and you'll lose people you love, but you'll find yourself in the process. You'll discover that your worth isn't measured in dollars given away, but in the love you show yourself by saying no. My name is Sarah, and I'm a recovering family cash cow. The recovery is ongoing, marked by small victories and occasional setbacks. But every day I don't give in to guilt trips is a win. Every boundary I maintain is a success. Every relationship built on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation is a triumph. This is my story, messy and complicated and still being written. But it's mine to write now, without anyone else holding the checkbook. As I sit here now, 3 years after that first no, I find myself thinking about the concept of family wealth, not in terms of money, but in terms of emotional resources. Every family has its own economy, its own system of debts and credits, investments and withdrawals. In healthy families, these transactions are balanced, reciprocal, sustainable. In mine, I was the sole investor in a fund that only paid dividends to others. I think about this often when I see families in public, wondering about their hidden economies. The tired looking mother at the coffee shop, is she the one everyone turns to when they need something? The successful businessman dining alone, has his family confused his net worth with his self worth? We all carry these invisible ledgers, these running tallies of what we've given and what we've received, what we owe and what we're owed. The truth is, cutting off my family financially was just the first step in a much longer journey of understanding my own value. For years, I'd measured my worth in dollars given away, in problems solved, in crises averted with a swipe of my credit card. Without that role, I had to figure out who Sarah really was when she wasn't being the family savior. It started small. I took a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had the time or money for when I was funding everyone else's dreams. My first attempts were disasters, lopsided bowls and crooked vases that made me laugh at their imperfection. There was something healing about creating something with my own hands, something that had value simply because I'd made it, not because it could be sold or given away. I started reading again, really reading, not just business books and financial blogs, but poetry and fiction and memoirs by people who'd traveled paths I couldn't imagine. I discovered authors who wrote about complex families, about the weight of expectation, about finding yourself in the space between who you are and who others need you to be. Each book was a conversation with someone who understood, even if we'd never meet. Travel became different too. Without the constant drain on my finances, I could actually save for trips I wanted to take. I went to Japan alone, spending 2 weeks exploring temples and trying foods I couldn't pronounce. I didn't post pictures on social media, didn't feel the need to prove I was having a good time. The trip was just for me, a gift to myself that came with no strings attached. But perhaps the biggest change was in how I approached my career. For years, I chased promotions and raises not for my own satisfaction, but to increase what I could provide for others. Every salary bump meant I could afford a nicer family vacation, cover more emergencies, be a better cash cow. Without that pressure, I could finally ask myself what I actually wanted from my work. The answer surprised me. I didn't want to climb higher on the corporate ladder. I wanted to use my skills for something meaningful. I started transitioning into the nonprofit sector, taking a pay cut that would have been unthinkable when I was supporting everyone else. But the work filled me in a way that earning money to give away never had. My family noticed the career change, of course. Facebook is a window that works both ways. Emma messaged me when she saw the announcement about my new position. "I saw you change jobs. I hope you're happy." Simple words, but I could read between the lines. She was really asking if I'd changed jobs because I couldn't afford the old lifestyle anymore, if cutting them off had somehow diminished me. "I've never been happier," I replied, and meant it, because happiness, I'd learned, wasn't something you could buy for yourself or anyone else. It was something you built, choice by choice, boundary by boundary. The nonprofit work brought unexpected healing. Many of the families we served were trapped in cycles of financial dependency, different from mine in scale but similar in pattern. I saw how easy it was for help to become harm, for generosity to enable helplessness, for love to become control. Every workshop I led on financial literacy was also a reminder to myself, money is a tool, not a measure of worth. Through this work, I met Maria, a single mother who'd escaped an abusive relationship and was rebuilding her life. She reminded me of Emma in some ways, that same creative spark dimmed by circumstance. But unlike Emma, Maria had no one to bail her out. She had to figure it out on her own, and watching her do it was inspiring. "I used to think I needed someone to save me," Maria told me one day after a workshop, "but needing to save myself made me realize how strong I actually was." Her words stayed with me, echoing my own journey. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover their own strength. James and I got engaged last fall, a simple proposal during a hike in the mountains. No expensive ring, no elaborate plan, just two people committing to build a life together based on partnership, not dependency. Planning our wedding became an exercise in navigating family dynamics I thought I'd left behind. Should we invite them? James asked gently, knowing the weight of the question. My family, the people who'd raised me, hurt me, used me, shaped me. The people I still love despite everything. I thought about it for weeks. Dr. Martinez and I dedicated several sessions to the question. In the end, I sent invitations to all of them with a note. You're invited to celebrate with us. No gifts expected or wanted, just your presence if you'd like to share our joy. My parents declined, sending a formal card that wished us well but made it clear they wouldn't attend. The rejection stung, but not as much as I'd expected. They were still punishing me for refusing to be punished anymore. Michael also declined, citing a scheduling conflict that we both knew was an excuse. But Emma came. She arrived early, helped set up chairs, took photos with an old film camera she'd bought at a thrift store. During the reception, she pulled me aside. I'm proud of you, she said simply. For all of it, for saying no, for finding James, for becoming who you are. Still figuring out my own path, but watching you find yours, it helps. We danced together at my wedding, my sister and I, to a song our mother used to sing when we were little. For those 3 minutes, we weren't the family cash cow and the dependent. We were just sisters, complicated and imperfect, but still connected. When the song ended, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for believing I could do better, even when I hated you for it." That moment crystallized something I'd been struggling to understand. The opposite of enabling isn't abandonment, it's belief. By refusing to be their solution, I'd force my family to find their own. Some, like Emma, had risen to the challenge. Others, like my parents, had simply found new people to manipulate. But that was their choice, not my responsibility. The ripple effects of my boundaries continued to spread through the extended family. Cousins I'd helped over the years had to adjust to my absence. Some understood, even apologized for their part in the exploitation. Others labeled me selfish and materialistic. Ironic, given that I'd stopped being materialistic the moment I stopped giving them materials. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. My Aunt Patricia, the one who'd been so critical of my selfishness, reached out last month. She'd spent 2 years as my parents' new financial target and finally understood what I'd experienced. I owe you an apology, she said over coffee, looking exhausted. I called you selfish when you were actually being self-preserving. There's a difference, and I didn't see it until I was in your shoes. We talked for hours, comparing experiences, finding disturbing patterns in how my parents operated. The manufactured emergencies, the guilt trips, the way they pitted family members against each other to maximize extraction. It was systematic, almost professional in its manipulation. Patricia had started seeing a therapist too, working through her own guilt and anger. The worst part, she said, is that I can't tell anymore if they actually love me or just see me as a resource. Every conversation feels transactional. Every expression of affection comes with a price tag. I knew that feeling intimately. It was the poison that seeped into every interaction once you realized you were being used. But I also knew the antidote: genuine relationships built on mutual respect. I'd found them with James, with his family, with friends who celebrated my successes without calculating their cut. I'd found them in unexpected places like book clubs and hiking groups and pottery classes. Communities where value wasn't measured in dollars, but in presence, in sharing, and showing up. The 3-year anniversary of saying no is approaching, and I've been reflecting on what I've lost and gained. The losses are real and significant. I don't have parents I can call when I need advice or comfort. I've missed family holidays and traditions that shaped my childhood. There's a grief there that may never fully heal, but the gains outweigh the losses. I have financial security and the freedom to make choices based on desire, not obligation. I have relationships unmarred by manipulation or guilt. I have self-respect that can't be bought or guilt-tripped away. I have a life that's truly mine, not mortgaged to others' expectations. Most importantly, I have the knowledge that I can survive loss, set boundaries, and rebuild. These are gifts you can't put a price tag on, wealth that can't be withdrawn from an ATM. They're mine forever, earned through pain but worth every difficult moment. I still sometimes wonder what would have happened if Uncle Thomas had never sent that message calling me a cash cow. Would I have continued giving until I had nothing left? Would the resentment have poisoned me slowly, turning me bitter? Would I have ever found the courage to say no without that stark moment of seeing myself through their eyes? But dwelling on what ifs serves no purpose. That message was a gift in its brutal honesty. It showed me what I'd become to them, and in doing so, showed me what I needed to become for myself. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways to better ones. We just have to be brave enough to walk through. My story isn't unique. I've met so many others carrying similar burdens, playing similar roles in their family economies. The successful child expected to fund everyone else's lives. The responsible one who became responsible for everything. The giver who forgot they were allowed to receive. We find each other in support groups and therapy waiting rooms, in online forums and quiet conversations. We share our stories and find strength in knowing we're not alone. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, know that you have the right to say no. You have the right to keep what you've earned. You have the right to love your family without funding their lives. You have the right to boundaries, to respect, to relationships that don't come with invoices attached. It won't be easy. You'll lose people, face criticism, question yourself 1,000 times. But on the other side of that pain is freedom you can't imagine until you claim it. The cash cow metaphor has stayed with me, but I've transformed its meaning. A cow gives milk, yes, but only when it's healthy, well-fed, and cared for. A cow that's constantly drained will eventually have nothing left to give. By taking care of myself, by setting boundaries, by refusing to be depleted, I ensured that when I do give, it comes from abundance, not obligation. These days, my generosity looks different. I donate to causes I believe in. I mentor young professionals navigating family pressure. I share my story with those who need to hear it. I give my time, my wisdom, my presence. But I don't, it's simple. This story, sometimes, but and to you know that sometimes the end of one story is the beginning of a better one. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought mattered to find what actually does. My name is Sarah, and this is my story. It's not a fairy tale or a cautionary tale. It's just true, messy, and painful, and ultimately liberating. It's the story of how I stopped being a cash cow and started being myself. And that, more than any amount of money I ever gave away, is my greatest achievement. Thank you for listening, for witnessing my journey, for perhaps seeing yourself in my struggles. We all have our own family economies to navigate, our own boundaries to set, our own definitions of love to examine. May you find the courage to write your own story, one where your worth isn't measured in dollars given, but in the fullness of a life truly lived. Remember, you are not a cash cow. You are a person deserving of love that doesn't cost anything but presence and genuine care. Don't let anyone, not even family, especially not family, convince you otherwise. The most expensive thing you'll ever own is your self-respect. Don't sell it cheap. Don't sell it at all. It's yours to keep forever.